Let's begin our last panel. First of all, I'm Yonah Bob from the Jerusalem Post. I wrote a couple of books. We have a very distinguished panel. As we heard from the head of the Mossad and head of the Shabak, that we can prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weaponry. Some people in the panel agree with that and some don't. If you're not in uniform, you can say whatever you want to say. And by the way, I think you can stop it, but we have a few controversies here among the panelists. Just a few words about the people in the panel. We have Gershon Hacohen. He is a former commander of the IDF. He was in the Syrian front up to 2014. He was also the commander of the military college, and he researches at the moment. And we have Amos Gilead, who is the director of IPS, Institute for Policy and Strategy, here in Herzliya. More than 30 years he served in the IDF as a general in the security forces. Last post, he was the head of the political division in the Ministry of Defense, was also involved to start relations with Sunni countries, Amman, many positions. Sorry, I have to skip because all these people in the panel did so many things. Then we have Dan Meridor. He was the Minister of Intelligence and of Justice, and very important for the Ministry of Defense. A lot of positions. He was the Secretary of Menachem Begin's cabinet. We also have Moshe Ya'alon, called Bogie, former Chief of Staff, Minister of Defense, a lot of positions. He was also the head of the Telem party, also blue and white, and he had a lot of impact on Israeli politics. And last but not least, he was... Before we start with Iran, I realized that Bogie is going to say a few words about Eyal Ragunis. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here among friends. This session is dedicated to Eyal Ragunis, my intelligence officer in the Matkal unit. I knew him when he was still in the paratroopers, and based on that, when I was appointed the commander of the Matkal, because I insisted to bring him back to permanent service. He was already an officer, and I thought he was the right man to be the intelligence officer. And I was right. It took me a while to convince him, but at the end of the day, I challenged him, and he was the ultimate intelligence officer. A lot of our activity is still covert, but one operation was exposed regarding the Tunisian bombing. I was the commander when I came to the target. I felt that I'm there not for the first time because Eyal, as an intelligence officer, made sure that I will know all the details. The combatants knew all the details, exactly where their house was. A lot of the intelligence that enabled us to have a successful operation. It's 2,000 kilometers from the state of Israel. It was very successful, and therefore for me, Eyal, who unfortunately has died from a medical event very young, actually today we still use his information, which is very important. May he rest in peace. Thank you, and I'd like to ask everybody in the panel the first answer, 3-4 minutes. We have 4 people. If we want to get to 3 questions, just an opportunity for you to just answer my question, but also focus on the things that are important for you. The first question, are we really, can we really stop Iran from obtaining nuclear weapon? We'll start with Gershon. Vis-a-vis the problems, other people are more experienced than I am. The basic understanding is that Iran is not Iraq with the nuclear plant, and it's not Syria. The first one who really understood that was Meir Dagan, the head of the Mossad at the time. The thought that you can do something similar was natural to those people who were successful in the past. But sometimes success is detrimental because sometimes you cannot make comparisons. Meir Dagan kept saying that it's going to go over to make an effort to stop the process in a covert way. And the last thing I want to talk about later, beyond all the basic difficulties, is the part that if we hit Iran, it cannot just end with a continuous war, as opposed to what we were able to do with Iraq and Syria. The advancement of the planning went a step higher. The moment Olmert could define and told the Air Force that he wants to attack and to devastate it without bringing about war, until he got a plan that gives him the opportunity to see the risk management, he wasn't happy and he did not approve it. Do we have the capability to go on a military process initiated by us without waging war? That's the question. And when you enter this war where we can end at a certain range of time, which is good for us, that is what I'll talk about later on. Amos. I suggest a different question, American question. Yes or no? Yes. So what? The question is, how did we get a situation whereby the one who decides whether we advance or not, according to what the state admits and what they relate to, heroic activities. The question we have to ask is, how did we come to a situation that the Iranians are the ones who make decisions whether they advance or not? That's what I'm worried about. Iran shouldn't have nuclear weapons, we said, and that's the question. And that means military force and wisdom. If we contributed to the annulment of the deal, which was bad, but in the Middle East, if it's bad, it can be something worse. So what? You thought Iran is going to die from the sanctions? If any soldier would tell it to me, I would throw him out. That's ignorance. It doesn't work this way. Where was it considered? What about decision-making? You see it in other things as well. And therefore, we came to a situation whereby now they stop, they play around with the world. And the real question is how we came to this situation after the Iranian issue from the intelligence point of view decades ago. Therefore, here it's only an example. That's what's worrying us. How can we combine power with wisdom? If you say, can we stop it? Of course we can. That's not the question. And the head of the Mossad was here. He was very impressive. And of course, he heads an organization that's very powerful, and we have plans. But at the end of the day, regarding, I think that there's a problem with the wisdom, whether to do it or not. And we came to a situation that I'm describing. And the question is, how do we go on from here? So I accept what you're saying, and I want to underscore the question. Let's say I spoke to a few heads of the Mossad formally, and they said, even if we can, at the moment, to stop Iran, I don't know, from air attack or whatever, at the end of the day, if it's 10 or 50 years, whatever, Iran eventually will obtain nuclear. Yeah, what about in another 500 years they'll have nuclear armaments and they themselves will not exist. Now we're talking about an acute situation. What do you mean? They said, first of all, you cannot go to all sorts of military methods. What do you mean from the air? Why air? Maybe there are other means, other things we can talk about, which is the combination of all this thing between wisdom and force. And in that's what we have to ask ourselves. If you sign a check for me that in 50 years' time they will not have a nuclear weapon, then I'm ready to come to I'm not going to be here anymore, but okay. We have to deal with a concrete question. How did we arrive at this point? I suggest we talk about the Iranian regime and not about Iran. Because Iran after the revolution in 1979 is a completely different Iran. I'm not just saying it in vain, because the Iranian regime today competes with another two extreme Islamic streams on the hegemony, and they're the most successful to export the Shiite revolution and to undermine Sunni regimes by attacks of all sorts. Saudis, Emirates, of course us as well. They want to raise us off the map. That's the heart of the matter. Their ambition. They compete, so to speak, with those who want an Islamic caliphate, Daesh, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. That's already negligible. Yeah, IS, okay. There is another factor that at the moment is restrained, and that is Turkey. They wanted to be the Ottoman leaders. The only ones who succeed at the moment is the Iranian. And why? Because of the weakness of the Western countries led by the US. And if that Khamenei, there were places where he stopped. In 2003, the Operation Iraqi Freedom, and the question that's hovering in the Middle East, who's next in line when the United States went from 9/11 to the attack of Afghanistan and then Iraq, the question is who's next? And then Muammar Gaddafi gave up the nuclear weapons without one shot. Khamenei stopped the progress. Before he had centrifuges, he already had the military part. And it was stopped in 2003. Why? Because he was afraid of an attack. A year and a half it took him to understand that the U.S. lost its political stomach. And in 2005 he renewed the project. The second time was with Obama. He manages to get a coalition with a very clever strategy of isolating the regime. They don't come to any convention anywhere in the world. Really significant economic sanctions, including mobilizing Russia and China. Netanyahu went to Moscow, to Beijing. Yes, he mobilized the Russians and the Chinese that they should join. And then the Security Council in 2010, they consolidated a coalition and eventually brought Khamenei in 2012 to his knees to the negotiating table. And the experts say we're not going to survive another year and a half if you continue. And unfortunately, the negotiations that ended with the JCPOA in 2015 was managed failingly out of weakness. To tell you what I think about it from timetable, and I'm worried about it now, Khamenei thinks in historical terms. An American president thinks about the next election. 4 years. Now we have the mid-elections. And he works under pressures. Instead of Iranians being under pressures, the Americans are. And this is a historical mistake. The other mistake was that exit from the deal in 2018. Trump, we pressured him to leave, and it released all the limitations that at least the deal had on the Iranians. It limited them for 300 kilograms, but it gave them a reason to run ahead, to go ahead without limitations, and the worst of all, to dismantle the coalition, the 5+1, which was consolidated against Iran. So what do I think we should do? To pull our sleeves up. Yes, to attack, not to attack. I think that the Western world, led by the US, should consolidate a coalition and again to bring Khamenei to the same dilemma. You want terror or survival? And today we have to decide, how do I do by ourselves? Is this enough when we have a new Cold War between the US and Russia and China? Is it possible to do the same coalition? It's more difficult, but it's not impossible. What's missing here is American power, the United States, after the exit from Afghanistan, the way it happened. And it's a loss of reaction to Iranian provocations. Iranians with the Houthi from Yemen are attacking an American frigate 3 times with missiles made in Iran. And obviously they didn't hit because the frigate had defense mechanisms. Otherwise they would hit it. The United States doesn't react. What are they afraid of? This whole discussion in the States, what? War? Everybody boots on the ground. There are so many other ways to act, to punish them. If you don't punish them, then of course you convey weakness. And it happened with Trump as well, with that drone, which he didn't react to. It conveyed weakness. And then they eliminated Soleimani, and the Iranians understood that the United States, they don't want to be engaged in war. In the Middle East, you can help many factors who will fight for themselves. Give them the political support, the economic support, the weapons, they will do it. You give them backing where you should. Maybe an air umbrella. But these discussions of boots on the ground or not, or here in Israel, attack or not attack, this is the wrong direction.
For more than 20 years, I have been engaging in this area. And until 9 years ago, I knew enough in order to answer your question, but now I don't know enough. Our capabilities and your capabilities, I don't know enough about them in order to give you a technical, operational answer, whether it is possible or not. But I don't think that's the main point. The main point is to have a broader perspective. Both Bogie and Amos talked about what happened until now. 2 grave errors. And if you think that we wanted to stop Iran, one was fighting President of the United States in his own Congress, and a failed attempt at that. And thankfully, the bad agreement was signed because the alternative was even worse. And from 300 tons in this regime, it was at least better than the other alternatives. And the second grave error that Israel did manage to do was the successful attempt to tell Trump to withdraw from the agreement. Moshe said he would have fired the intelligence officer, but it's hard to say because people won't understand what I say. It was a misunderstanding by a person who said that he does understand. He simply did not understand. He thought he understood, but he was wrong. And the result was that Iran was released from its reins and simply ran on ahead. And now we're in a worse situation, certainly in terms of Iran's ability to achieve its goal. A little bit about our capabilities I do want to say. Again, I don't know the last years, only from outside, but I know a lot about what happened before. I was engaged in that until 2013. Every week I remember I had a conversation with Meridor in 2002 when he entered office as head of Mossad, and I came to him and he told me, I have one assignment, one task, to stop Iranian nuclear. And he told me in English, not best effort, to stop. And I know very well what's happened there, what was done back then. And whether it was genius, clever, courageous, Iranian nuclear did not stop. And I'm saying that by looking at ourselves. I mean, we did magnificent things. The Jewish brain, hopefully it's not a racist way of saying, but we do have a lot of interesting ideas and creativity, and we understand a lot, but we cannot stop the idiot. We're not facing an idiot character from some children's book. We are facing a big country that is very determined, and we have stalled them. We haven't stopped them. And I heard the head of the Mossad say that the Mossad can. I don't know whether we can or not. I don't want to talk about that. But I think that we need to understand the huge difference about what happened. We're used to a war where Jews fight Arabs and then the Americans come and put things in order. That's a different world. So it's very nice to say that we are all alone and we have to protect ourselves, but it's not ideal. If you can be part of a large coalition, and if you can have great state, military, economic power, like the United States, like Europe, and Bogie even mentioned Russia and China at some point, in the whole world, and most of the Arab countries, then it would be stupid to work on our own. I mean, it helps politically. You seem like a big hero. You're facing the world, but it doesn't bring the results. And therefore, the right way, if possible, is really to incentivize, to help the coalition to pressure Iran. For two reasons. One, so we understand what's happening. It's also the international agency, but it's also our intelligence. The Americans, to have intelligence collaboration, I assume they know a lot. I mean, that's my impression. I don't know. But the Iranians should feel completely exposed. And the second thing is, and that it really is the American stick, that if they digress, if they stray off course, they will have it. They will get a blow will be delivered to them, because if they feel that maybe they won't be caught, or maybe if they feel that if they are caught, nothing will happen, never mind, that both of these options are not good. That's what we should focus on. And just to conclude, you didn't ask about this, but I do want to say, because I do see some fear in people's eyes, even hysteria or panic, as I see it. For many years we knew that perhaps one of our enemies will have nuclear weapons, and we built a strategy that, as I understand it, it's not a brief one. It has 3 legs to stand on: thwarting, defense, such as the arrow, and the deterrence, which I can't speak about so much. These 3 legs to stand on, none of them is 100%, but they're each very powerful. And so when we talk about Munich, and when we talk about the Holocaust, and we're trying to scare people and say that we're in the worst place ever in the last 80 years, no, we are in power. We have very strong as a Jewish people now, more than ever. And thwarting is not easy, and usually you don't thwart capabilities. It's a very difficult question. I think that we should be thwarting capabilities, because it's a very special instance, because of Iran and things. But thwarting is just one thing. You can thwart, like in 1981 in Iraq, or in Deir ez-Zor in 2007, where the Air Force strikes and there's a thwarting, where the British and the Americans go to Gaddafi and tell him, stop it. And there's another way of thwarting, which is what we're trying to do in Iran with a military, economic, political agreement. It's a big word, and it has a lot of things under it. But there's no one single step. It's not a snapshot. It's a movie. And therefore, when you finish the military campaign, sometimes we're so impressed with the military capabilities, and I understand that. It's justified. But then what? Will the Iranians then give up? No, if you don't have a long-term strategy in place or a capability in place, then it's pointless. And so we need to develop our capabilities, we need to work on them, but we also need to maintain this international large coalition and pressure them, and also to make sure that the US will take action if they do stray from the path. Because I want to say one more thing. We thought we knew. I remember that day in 2007, in June, Ehud Barak was the Minister of Defense, and after a few days, I wasn't in politics, but I was in security. I was engaging in these areas, and I was told to come to the Ministry of Defense, and he showed me the material as it came, and he said, look what the Syrians are building. And I said what I said, but I remember saying, Ehud, from now on, I don't know anything. Syria is the country that is covered most in intelligence. And what's the most crucial thing for us? Nuclear. And we didn't know anything about it for 7 or 8 years. And that's why the thwarting capabilities should be built, but also the deterrence capabilities and also the defense capabilities. And we should use any coalition possible, and not to go ahead and speak about doing things on our own instead of winning elections. That's all it does. Gershon, you said when we spoke that you wanted to talk about the campaign, the new campaign, if Iran will become a nuclear state, and what they might do in the region, and how we should cope with such a situation, such a scenario. Yes, first of all, as you can see, I hurt myself while at the beach. I could maybe I wouldn't have been here, and it doesn't mean I'm not going to go back to the beach tomorrow. The Iranians can be hit and struck and attacked, but their direction is clear, probably more than mine is. Because when we talk about nuclear is a technological capability from the from the century ago, almost 100 years ago. So it's not too complex to realize this capability, and the Iranians are capable. And I do agree with what Dan said. The Iranian threat, in much of our talk within Israeli society, was served as a manipulative means, the kind of, if we're not united, we will all burn with a nuclear bomb like those Jews back then in the Holocaust. It doesn't matter if they were Jews, full-fledged Jews or not. So do you mean it? So you saying it's an existential threat? It doesn't matter if it is or not, for one principal reason, because it has no criteria. And I don't want to intimidate, and I don't want to scare. And I think that some of our dialogue, some of our discourse is already demagogical, but I will try and say it very cautiously. Following what Dan has said, I'm allowing myself to say that, to stand a bit extreme and say that in Auschwitz, in one day, more than 20,000 Jews were killed. A nuclear bomb, if it were to be dropped, God forbid, will probably not kill more than 20,000. And so we can address it. We have survived far more than that 20,000 a day in Auschwitz. So our survival skills are infinite. And therefore, they cannot threaten us. They cannot intimidate us. But what must we do? And that's something that I want to say. And that is the main thing I can contribute here. When we say that we will know what to do if we will be left alone to our own devices, to our own fate, and we are able to take action, it's true that we will have a capability. We will develop it. And it's okay that we will be able to take action. But truthfully, we must say that even in the war in Ukraine, where it's clear that the side that waged the war is not legitimate, the main question that any child asks is who started it. And it would be very difficult to garner international support if we start this without it being justified, because the war will continue and we will not be able to end it without the America's help and support. It's not an event that we'll be able to end on our own easily. And what's very significant when it comes to Iran, what did Khomeini learn and what did all of his disciples learn back in 1981 when the Gulf War began? Saddam Hussein expected a short war. I think he means 1991. He said there was oil, 2 weeks and it'll be over. Khomeini's army and him, they did not have the means, and he fought. He was determined. And how did he gain victory? To start off, it was not to stop Saddam Hussein from making achievements, but to stop him from ending the war within 2 weeks like he expected to do. Once they will be able to drag us to an ongoing war, much like in Ukraine, with a war that Russia began, it's too much for us. We can't go on for very long. We will not be able to end it on our own, and therefore we must think of this threat. That is really the big threat. Amos, you wanted to talk about Israel and whether it will have the right to take action if it will be isolated. And also, at the same time, what can we do better or less good and to reach a better place? I don't think we should frighten ourselves with an existential threat and then end up finding nothing. I think there will be an armed race. Mohammed bin Saban, whose discourse is violent. If he says it, he will develop, he will develop. I don't want to live in a Middle East where there is in which there's an armed race. So, as for military options, as those before me have said, they know all about it, and what they've said is true. But we also need to be wise. We have to draw lessons from the United States. The United States said, the president said, Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. You can believe him or choose not to believe him. But as Bogie said, when they frightened them, it worked. So we need their support. Again, we need to use everything in our power to convince them. We have amazing intelligence. We have great intelligence services with amazing capabilities built over many years. We need to have a dialogue with them on all levels possible and to harness them so that they can deliver on their promise. It's a difficult dialogue. It has many implications. They said that the US is leaving the Middle East. They can't leave the Middle East because if they leave the Middle East, they will find it with a biological bomb in Times Square. And Zawahiri, whether they left him or not, he was also cut by some kind of razor or something. So what I'm trying to say is that what needs to be done now is to get everyone on board, and hopefully we will have some stable leadership at some point here in Israel that won't just waste our money and resources on brawls and doesn't end these brawls. It's ongoing. Maybe we'll have this utopian situation where we have a stable government. First of all, we need to learn lessons. We cannot shame and insult the president because we have no substitute for the United States. And the same is true for Europe, Russia and China. They're already a challenge that needs to be analyzed. I don't know if we have time. There's a war going on in Ukraine. But ultimately, that is what we are relying on. That is our source of support, and we need to do everything in our power to stop it. And I don't think we should be talking about what ifs right now, certainly not right now. I think we should perhaps have this discussion when these things happen, because we can fill this vacuum with so much talk about how we will cope with it, but I'm not sure whether it's not too much for us. And the doctrine, the Begin doctrine, let's call it, where the heads of intelligence said, don't attack Saddam Hussein, and he said, Hitler, in the form of Saddam Hussein, will not intimidate us with this weapon. He will not threaten us with this weapon. We're not going to let him have it. And the former prime minister at the time, if he thought that we needed to attack, and let's say everybody said we shouldn't. Are you talking about Netanyahu or Bennett? Really, these are the best people of this country. And they said, don't attack, do attack. And he could have perhaps convened the cabinet. He had enough power to do it. And if he had told the IDF to do it, the IDF would have done it. No, that's an implication. I'm talking about excuses. Right now we need to focus our efforts on them not having it. And we have several cards. We have the military might. And ultimately I think they're doing something. There's what the Mossad said, but I don't want to go over it. There's the United States. There's the Arab countries who are also worried about it. And that's a huge card. Who would have believed we'd be such friends with them? And there's also a positive change with Turkey. They're following... we are stopping terrorists. We have several assets. We don't have to despair. We just have to focus our attention and resources so that it's a top priority. There are two avenues, nuclear and ballistic. If they have nuclear, that'll be an umbrella for the ballistic channel, for the terror channel. Violence and terrorism will thrive. And if we're worried about ballistics, what will happen when they have nuclear? I'm worried about that. But we have so many cards up our sleeves that we can certainly make use of with one stable leadership that will divert its attention to it, that will learn lessons, not to go against the United States as we did, because that was really one of the stupidest things we've ever done in history. You talked a little bit about Netanyahu's conduct. Would you have found acceptable Lapid's and Bennett's conduct vis-a-vis the United States? That was slightly different. I don't want to give them grades, give them scores. This isn't personality tests we're talking about. There was criticism, but not public criticism. Yes, that's very important. A dialogue is important. You can be poignant about it. But you can't humiliate the US president who is your friend. And I'm not trying to say that Obama is, I'm not going to advocate for him, but he definitely contributed to Israel. To go against him, I cannot say stupid in a stronger word. Maybe I have a limited vocabulary, but I cannot explain just how stupid that was. It caused such great damage to our security, and I think a lesson has been learned, and I think a poignant dialogue is in place. Is the agreement good or not good? I don't know what a bad agreement is. It depends on what it says. If the agreement is a total catastrophe, of course it's unwanted and undesirable. But if it stops Iran for a few years, and if it's an alternative to Iran racing on ahead, so we need to weigh everything, as the case is, and the IDF, etc. We also have assets, And I think that we have to work hard, and we have been working hard. The IDF's relations with the US is very important, and we're part of CENTCOM now. That also gives us power, so we have many cards up our sleeves, and that's what we need to focus our attention on.
Non-stability in the area, the head of the Mossad, as well as Naftali Bennett, they said that something different is happening now. If we can attack 100 drones, if we have to, do you think we have today the right balance to deal with the instability in the area? And if not, what do we have to do? I suggest to talk less and do more. But I know the Iranian nuclear since I was head of intelligence. Prime Minister Rabin in 1995, the project was exposed by the Israeli intelligence just before I entered office. It took me 2 years to convince the Americans that this is a military nuclear project. Today, they're convinced. The Europeans, only in 2000, the Chinese, 2010. And therefore, first of all, there is an advancement and understanding in the world that there's a military nuclear project. Whether it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And I said it in English to the Chinese when I talked to them about the project. Any case, first of all, the world deals with it, but it deals with it only in the nuclear aspect of it. There's no state. What about the state that disseminates terror all over the world? They tried to murder a Saudian ambassador in a restaurant in Washington, a wife of an Israeli representative in Bombay, the attack in Burgas, in Georgia, everywhere in the world. So we deal only with nuclear, but there's a regime here that we have to make an effort to go all the way. On the one hand, they say if they have a deal now, they're going to get tens of billions for terror. That's a good question. But the question is not with the deal or without the deal. The question is what kind of a deal, if it retreats them back. And takes as the first one did in 2015, it didn't include terror or missiles and all the military dimensions. Then it was a bad deal. It was a historical miss out. It was better than no deal. But now if there's no deal, they'll continue without any supervision. So maybe yes, deal. But what kind? So with wisdom, with sense, the state of Israel today with open channels vis-a-vis the Americans. We're not fighting with them. You see how people go back and forth, ministers, conversations with the prime minister, Mossad, the head of the national security. No door is closed. When we were in cahoots with the Americans, we were out of the door at the time. All this cooperation ended at the time when we were in bad terms with them. But since the days of Rabin until today, the Israeli statement says that we have to act and do anything to prevent Iran from obtaining. Can you imagine they have a bomb today so they can continue to do terror under the umbrella? Turkey is not going to sit idle, neither will Egypt. That's what we need in the Middle East. So we have to act across the board against Iran. First of all, we're not alone. I know that in 1995, I was head of intelligence, and I said, if the Iranians will go to a process, a success-oriented project, then they won't have it. And you see, that was 2005. So we have to act on all channels. Israel has to prepare as if it's on its own to defend itself with its own strength, but to allow the United States to lead with open channels in order to try and convince in the right way. Dan, you related to the defense. We always talk about offense. So is our aerial defense against Iran? We're not talking about Iron Dome vis-a-vis Hamas. We're asking whether the Chetz missile is enough. And Bennett says that it can change the entire rules of the game in 2 years. Are we on the way that we can actually defend ourselves, even if there'll be a threat from Iran, whether rockets or even Hamas? In my mind, an important element, the IDF did quite a lot to create defense. At the time, they took this as if it's non-patriotic, but we did build some systems. Yes, you mentioned the Chetz, Iron Dome, and the magic carpet. Just a second. Defense, it's not just active defense. There are all sorts of ways to defend and intelligence in order to protect. But protection is different. If you talk even vis-a-vis Gaza, and people look on the roof how the rockets are launched, that's a different world. That's not what it was in the past. But defense doesn't do it by itself. And here the question is not what will be from Iran. Iran created a significant military power here, next door, in Lebanon. The Houthi in Yemen, they have military force. I know things from the media, but they have possibilities. It's not technologies that you have to be a genius to do. And they are a very wise nation. They're not stupid. Therefore, there's no system that will prevent all this. If the Hezbollah was built actually in order to deter us from attacking Iran. But Iran wanted to create a capability to prevent Israel from attacking it. And so it built military forces all around us. And it's not going to be wasted on other things, I don't think. If, in fact, there'll be such a struggle and all this will be active, we have a defense challenge. We're not going to walk in the street as if nothing happened. We have to deal with the defense. We have to improve it. But by itself, it's not going to do anything. Also, the capability of defense has changed in technology. And we are very good, better than others. Cyber world, we didn't mention it here. Cyber world, sometimes you can hit by cyber. There's very different ways to defend yourself. But that's one more word. It can sound as if we're poor people, we need America to come and help us. I think we can explain to the Americans that it's an American problem, a world where you have such a nuclear armament of a non-professional treaty that's been holding for 60 years. We don't know how it's going to. This is a world dangerous to America, not just to us. If you don't have any control, it's dangerous for America. And America maybe has to wage wars. In Iraq today, it's a different. If you see one drone or a commando unit, they can do more than what you did in the last 50 years. Therefore, it's an American interest. And we think it's objective. So there's a way to convince them, work together with them, not out of weakness or fear or cowardice, but not by hunger. But we have to do everything we can in order to mobilize the international world. From Morocco and Egypt and Europe. It wasn't like that in the past. It's stupid to work on your own and you're a hero saving Israel. That doesn't do the job. We have a capability to work in a better way. And the fact that they don't have nuclear today, because that's the way it was. Let's continue without being over-pressured, wise people. Okay, we have one more minute for each. Let's say there's a deal, all the money that head of Mossad Barnea said, hundreds of billions after a few years goes to Hezbollah, to Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the militias in Syria, all the scenario that we want. What do we do now? 1 minute, please.
To a certain extent, we are encountering this concept that Soleimani has already placed it on the table when he talked about a ring of fire around Israel. I think that this basic perception of the IDF is there. The IDF's last exercise, Chariots of Fire, has also contended with this scenario. The IDF can deal with it. The bottom line is, with all the preparedness that requires the third cycle, the third circle will be challenged. And I personally think that we will be required to increase the forces of the IDF vis-a-vis conventional warfare because of unconventional developments. Amos? If there will be an agreement, that means that we will be able to address the conventional threat, and we will be able to build our deterrence and grappling capabilities with the other thing. Also, it depends on the agreement. It all depends on which agreement it is. Until the negotiations are over, we have to know which kind of agreement it is. When we talk about the Iranian threat, from all its aspects, I think that we will have, if there will be an agreement, first of all, we'll be able to supervise it, and then we'll need intelligence, because the Iranians, if they don't feel like there's intelligence and deterrence, they will go on their usual track, and we'll have to grapple with that threat. And by the way, one proof of how important the United States is, ultimately, we're in a sensitive position in Lebanon, vis-a-vis what's called Lebanon, allegedly the Republic of Lebanon. But ultimately, you just have to activate the Americans, and they will find a solution, and they will postpone this conflict. So if the agreement is the lesser of all evils, then we will be able to focus on deterrence and on building our coping capabilities, and also to prepare in case that they do violate the nuclear part of the agreement, while relying on our own forces, but also while collaborating with the United States. It sounds like a whole list of slogans, but it's a policy. And it's been followed by my predecessors, and I think that it should work, because you have no other alternative. You have to cope with the capabilities and with international collaboration, but we can't be on our own. We can't be like Iran in that respect. Moshe? I'm not used to being called Moshe. Anyway, in either case, Israel will have to be in possession of, to develop, and to have a big strike, a big club, big blow. Because if terrorism will get more financing from Iran, which could happen whether or not there will be an agreement. I think that we talked about defense. I am convinced that the best defense is offense. Ultimately, bringing Hamas or Hezbollah to a ceasefire, or creating a deterrence balance, because Hezbollah can shoot every day, and it doesn't even shoot on the border like it used to do, and Hamas can also do the same, but it's restrained. And the same thing happened after Protective Edge, and it's the same now, and that's because of deterrence. That's because of the prices that they paid in their rounds against us. The Israeli citizens, don't see it, but we see it. We see it in aerial pictures and images. And so when conflict happens, the only way to get a ceasefire on our terms is by making them pay heavily. We want them to say, we want a ceasefire on our terms. And that's why these capabilities need to be developed. But also Iran trying to get near us and opening up a front in Syria. It didn't happen. Why? Because of the war between wars? No, we are okay, we are capable, we can develop our capabilities. It is precise fire and precise intelligence and other capabilities vis-a-vis nuclear and terrorism, and the attempt to pose a threat in the form of rockets and militia groups. We need a big club, a huge sort of a bat, and to sophisticate it and to collaborate with the United States and not to be in conflict with it, certainly not publicly. We can disagree behind closed doors, but we should be working together. And one final comment from you, Dan. If there will be an agreement, and everything that's been said I agree with, if there will be a reasonable agreement, first of all, despite everything that's been said here, if we are not able to take action, because everyone takes action when there's been an agreement, then you are the one that's isolated. So we have to live with this agreement if it is signed, and we will have to develop intelligence capabilities all the time in order to know what's happening there, together with others, and to make a huge effort to have the United States holding this stick or this club, because they are more of a threat to Iran than we are, because their club is financial and it's military, etc. And I agree with Bogie about defense and offense, because despite defense being very important, I also want to add that the wars that we have once been in are no longer, and we can now make them pay a price that is not massive but is precise and is destructive, and it has to do with precise intelligence capabilities in real time on several human or other targets, and the ability to target them, whether it's using a drone or a missile or through cyber or in any other way. It's a completely different world, and by the way, it costs a lot in terms of money and blood, and causes a lot of damage. And if the other side will know, and it's known usually that we have these capabilities, then it matters to them, it touches upon them, and it's not like just some person dying somewhere. I think that our need and our ability to develop capabilities also in terrorism, against terrorism, that are precise and in real time, and on targets that are crucial to the terrorism employed against us. It's a different kind of war that I am convinced and I hope that the IDF is preparing for, and it's based on our wonderful capabilities in the technological and intelligence realms, and therefore we also need to build a defense, but it's not enough. We also need an offense in order to create deterrence vis-a-vis this terror. And nuclear, we talked about that already. We're not going to be intimidated. We're not too worried, because we can do it. We can manage. No panic. Thank you very much. It was fascinating. I always learn from all of you. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Thank you very much.